Bev had a question as well. So she stated, it was interesting how behaviors changed after the implicit bias test. But how do you keep this present for yourself or in general on a day-to-day basis?
It's a hot topic right now, and we're all asking ourselves the same question. How do we keep this as a priority, something that we keep working toward and moving forward? And the reality is it takes work and it takes effort. And it is not exclusively to race, right? I have to challenge myself on gender biases that I've had growing up in American society, and my own race biases as well in my practice. And so if you think it's a one day fix it and it's over, I think you're going to be mistaken. I think a longitudinal, continued medical education, continued interpersonal or introspective analysis of things. And when somebody highlights a problem, run toward it, like figure it out. Like it's so easy to please anyone who accuses someone of something that could be engaged in like having biases or something, it's so offensive. But I would definitely encourage you to listen and make sure you question if there is something you can improve upon. And so, and also just staying up to date on the literature. We've found, for example, if I wanted to include everything, there's the rate work for drug testing our minority patients, the use of restraints on our minority patients, our EMS personnel taking minority patients to our safety net hospitals, even when it's out of the way, right? And all these, I'm pretty sure the person doing it is not aware that they're impacting a certain demographic in a harmful or deleterious way. And so being able to identify those and be able to replicate them in your practice without somebody else having to identify it is probably going to be the best way to do it. And just, it's going to take work. It's going to take some effort. And so
Catherine also had a question. Did you want to just ask it yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Joshua. That was super informative. I'm actually starting to read the book, How to Be Anti-Racist, and I'm only now starting. Yeah, fantastic. I'm only now starting to understand the different terms. I thought I understood, but it's really helping. I come from a point of view of faculty development. In my immediate environment, we have, and I'm just sitting here and counting them, we have maybe somewhere between 5 to 10 Black faculty members out of hundreds in our region. I don't think we have any African Americans learners at the moment, but we do have a couple of self-identified Indigenous learners. So there's an interest from the rest of the community to, one, learn about how to be anti-racist and how to support diversity and mitigate each of our biases. And two, to support the few folks who are, in that small group. I don't really have a good approach in terms of how to, in this kind of environment, not to draw potentially unwelcome attention to the few folks, and inadvertently, nominating them as learning resources, which maybe they don't want to or are not comfortable with, but at the same time also to create an environment or foster an environment where they feel welcome and included and not recognized, but not highlighted at the same time.
I think this is an excellent question. I just had a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine released this past couple weeks ago called Interviewed While Black, and it looks at some common themes that it's specifying within the interview process, but I think it's also very relevant in education, higher education in general, and things like stereotypes, imposter syndrome, tokenism, and other things that can impact the higher education experience. And you mentioned this minority tax is, I think, what you're describing, this idea that as an African American, I'm now tasked to do these additional extra steps for the sake of everyone else in the department, in the education component, and also just recruitment, right? And making sure mentorship and recruitment. And it's different for me. I signed up for this. This is my passion. This is what I want to do. So I can't necessarily speak from anecdotal personal experience. But I would say it is part of the hidden curriculum when we talk about affirmative action and like what it does for a program, that it's not just for the African-American students. Everyone else involved is going to benefit from this as well, particularly your other students when they're dealing with minority patients. And so it is important for them to have a presence and everything. And I would just make sure you approach each situation cautiously. They call it either a minority tax or a race ambassador. And that's the idea that you're tasking an individual with an excessive amount of work because of their minority status and not trying to punish them for that. But there's ways to get around that, because you still do want to emphasize that we're trying to make a recruitment effort. We're trying to diversify our team. We're trying to provide the hidden curriculum of minorities. And I would say compensate them professionally. For example, for interview day, for us, we have interview day where minority applicants can come. Our minority residents will all be asked to be there, but then they could get an extra shift off or apply a different metric to their curriculum in different ways that have some more time off in separate settings. And then just trying not to put them on the spot, preparing them and asking them specifically if they'd like to be part of it. Most of the time they'll say yes, but try and ask them to wait 24 hours and think about it. So it's not such a pressure situation, and see, and if this is something they sign up for, make sure they're just, once again, compensated and just professionally in a moral standpoint that we understand that this is actual work for them. So, it's also difficult. Not everyone is an expert in the field. I didn't know any of this data until I set out to do my grand rounds a couple of years ago. This was all, I had to learn about subconscious bias myself. It's something I can conceive and have anecdotal experience with, but the concepts and my ability to speak freely about it is only through the specific work I've done in my fellowship.
Thank you.
And I believe Mark had a follow-up question about allyship.
Yeah, I just, this is how I approach it as a white male with privilege. I really look at how can I be a better ally, and maybe could you comment on that? Because I think it's something that many people would like to lean into, but are, not sure and uncertain about how to do that well without taking the air out of the room, ourselves.
Absolutely. And that's a difficult. Annie Sadowski was my mentor when I was at Mayo Clinic. And that was the mentor I spoke about, whose father was an ophthalmologist and who went to Brown University. I think listening first, making sure that this moment, I think a big part of allyship is validation. And so often we've come to understand as minorities, and I'm speaking from a racial minority, but there's gender minorities, sexual orientation minorities. I'm a member of the LGBT community, but in any marginalized minority, it's just be able to listen and validate, and don't make them have to fight to describe their experiences to you, because immediately you lose them if they don't believe that you are an open ear for them. And two, allowing them the platform. And it's so easy oftentimes and even I've become guilty of it. Mansplaining is a common colloquialism that happens in terms of, I'm sure they're using in Canada as well. It's like women have something to say or it's an expert in the field, we talk over them. And I think it's just because I grew up as a male and I caught myself doing it, but it's so often easy to do that to marginalize or underrepresented members in your category if you're not recognized you're doing it, but allowing them a platform, allowing them a chance to speak. And just, I think validation is a huge part of the allyship, but and behind closed doors, I think being a member of the LGBT community has really helped me with this, in that a lot of people can't, I don't necessarily come across as a member of the LGBT community, and you will often get jokes or something like that behind closed doors when they're not perceiving me. But I will never hear a black joke. There will never be a time in which somebody comfortably does a black joke in front of me, right? And so I think if you're behind closed doors and you have an opportunity to fix this without your ally or without the underrepresented minority or marginalized population to be there, I would take that full force. I would go, and not in an accusatory manner, but you can always pull them aside and a little bit later make everyone comfortable. But I would make sure that it's never a comfortable setting. Some of the jokes and the humor and the painful indifference, those lead to the disparities we're seeing, right? If you look at the Joyce Echek one, a lot of that was humor they were using in such a nasty, horrible way on that video. And then Brian Sinclair, these are situations where humor and indifference is actually what's the poison. And oftentimes we get those jokes, it's pervasive, but the actual action is what we find horrifying. But it's the joke and the pain of it that's breeding the action. So
this has been an incredible, really rich conversation. And thank you very much, Dr. Ellis, for all of that. Well, we have a quick question. Should we slip it in, Claire?
Please do. Yeah.
Okay, one quick question.
Yeah, you have about 3 minutes. It's perfect.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Thank you so much for the talk, by the way. I was just wondering for some of us who are looking to learn more, I'm personally a student who's kind of hoping to go into healthcare someday. And I think I really want to learn more about how does race and how do other kind of implicit biases that we have impact the way that we interact with others. So I'm just wondering if you know of any resources or things that you would recommend to kind of start off with to build a foundation, because I think for me, there's so much left to learn. And I'm really interested in learning if there are any fundamental resources or things like that you would maybe recommend exploring.
How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi is like the new popular book where you can really discuss in American society regarding this. I think reading a book is a great thing. If you're not into that, there's a couple movies, and it's two different. I always separate this into two categories. There's the experience of higher education for minorities, and then there's patient outcomes and patient practice with minorities, and they're a little different. If you're worried about the educational component, there's a number of movies or shows that Dear White People that have been made by African-American producers and allows you to have some exposure without it being like a 300-page book. As far as healthcare disparities, I think just being knowledgeable about it. And hopefully it's part of your guys' curriculum. It's pretty much being implemented in our medical school curriculum here, and specifically at Harvard, I'm part of that initiative. And so it's a difficult task at hand, but I think any effort, even the slightest effort, can actually pay a huge dividend for you and managing this. And I think just having the importance and care of it is going to help you in your practice later. And so understanding that it exists is going to be your first step. So if you had to pick a book, I would pick Ibram Kendi just because it's popular and a lot of people will reference it in these conversations, these health equity conversations.
Josh, I might ask you, can you be bothered to just write down the names in the chat, and we'll put it actually, when we post your video, we'll say these are the books that you recommended and link to them.
Okay, well, we could probably go on for another hour or so, but we are coming to the end of our time. I really want, on behalf of the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Advisory Committee and MacPFD, and I actually should let Teresa say a few words before we close, but we really want to thank you so much for spending this time with us, sharing your experience and your knowledge, and really engaging in a very rich and insightful, reflective conversation. So thank you very much. And we hope in the future that we'll actually able to have you actually travel here and be present with us. But for the time being, thank you very much, Joshua, for coming here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thank you so much, Teresa, for setting this up, and Claire and Anne. You guys are great and so awesome. So thank you guys so much. It's something I'm so passionate about.
Yeah, thanks so much to everyone for coming. The other thing would be that we do have upcoming events that I've put in the event calendar as well. And next, and Josh, you're welcome back to come back to attend. We have two events on actually December 1st and 2nd. We've actually had two speakers be willing to kind of speak about their take on intersectionality. It is part of what we call the women's chat, but men and women are both definitely invited, and people who are identify as non-binary, of course. But it's topics that some of our women in our faculty development group thought were important for us to talk about, specific because it was something that they all bonded over wanting to talk about. And there's also a great one on the learning environments and a survey design workshop as well that also has almost as many signups as Josh's workshop did. So we're really excited to have you all, and hopefully we'll catch you next time, and it'll be amazing.